Dong Xoai, Vietnam, June 1965. This is Ground Zero. The Battle of Dong Xoai was one of the most important engagements of the Vietnam War before large-scale American ground forces entered combat. Fought in June 1965, about 56 miles, 90 kilometers north of Saigon, it demonstrated that the Communist forces could coordinate large conventional attacks against fortified positions while defeating successive relief columns. The battle marked a turning point that influenced American decisions to commit more combat troops to South Vietnam. At the time, Dong Xoai was a small district town surrounded by rubber plantations, dense jungle, and a rolling terrain. The district headquarters served as a military and administrative center for the surrounding countryside. Although the town itself had limited strategic value, it occupied an important position along roads connecting South Vietnamese outposts. Controlling Dong Xoai also helped Communist forces expand their influence in the northern province. The Communist assault was planned by the VietCong with support from regular North Vietnamese personnel serving in larger formations. The principal attacking force was the VietCong 9th Division, including the 271st and 272nd Regiments, reinforced by local force battalions, heavy weapons companies, engineers, recoilless rifles, heavy machine guns, and mortars. Their total strength is generally estimated at between 4,000 and 6,000 troops. The attackers prepared the operation carefully, reconnoitering defensive positions and selecting ambush sites along likely relief routes. Defending Dong Xoai initially were units of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the ARVN, together with Civil Guard and Regional Force personnel. A detachment of the South Vietnamese Special Forces occupied a fortified camp inside the town alongside members of the U.S. Army Special Forces Advisory Team. The American presence was small, consisting primarily of advisors who trained and coordinated with South Vietnamese troops rather than commanding the defense directly. The Communist commanders intended not only to capture the district headquarters, but also to lure South Vietnamese reinforcements into carefully prepared ambushes. This tactic had become increasingly common during the war. Instead of withdrawing immediately after seizing an objective, the attackers remained nearby, anticipating that relief columns would be sent by road or by helicopter. Those reinforcements could then be attacked under favorable conditions. The assault began during the night of the 9th of June 1965, after an intense bombardment with mortars and recoilless rifles. Communist infantry attacked from several directions simultaneously. Engineers breached defensive obstacles while assault teams moved through gaps in the perimeter. Heavy automatic weapons suppressed defenders attempting to man bunkers and fighting positions. Close-quarter combat followed as attackers systematically cleared buildings and fortifications. The defenders resisted stubbornly despite being outnumbered. American advisors coordinated artillery support and radio communications whenever possible. Air support from the United States Air Force and the Republic of Vietnam Air Force struck enemy concentrations around the town, although poor visibility, close fighting, and the proximity of friendly troops often limited the effectiveness of air attacks. The battle quickly became fragmented into numerous small engagements around bunkers, trenches, and individual buildings. As news of the attack spread, the South Vietnamese Command organized relief forces. Elements of the ARVN 7th Infantry Regiment and airborne units were dispatched to retake the town and rescue the surviving defenders. Helicopters inserted troops near the battlefield, while other units advanced overland. These movements were exactly what the Communist commanders had anticipated. The relief columns encountered well-prepared ambushes. Communist forces occupied concealed firing positions in the rubber plantations all along the roads leading into Dong Xoai. When South Vietnamese troops entered the kill zones, they were engaged with heavy machine guns, mortars, recoilless rifles, and concentrated small arms fire. Attempts to maneuver often exposed units to additional attacks from concealed positions. Helicopter operations also faced significant danger. Landing zones came under intense fire from heavy machine guns and small arms. Several helicopters were damaged or destroyed while delivering reinforcements or evacuating casualties. Pilots frequently landed under fire to extract wounded soldiers and advisors, demonstrating the growing importance of air mobility despite its vulnerability to determined ground defences. A particularly hard-fought engagement occurred when South Vietnamese airborne troops attempted to reinforce the area. Although the airborne soldiers were among the ARVN's most capable units, they too suffered heavy casualties in repeated attacks. Communist commanders maintained pressure by committing reserve battalions at critical moments rather than launching one continuous assault. This allowed them to exploit weaknesses while preserving combat power. Logistics played a decisive role throughout the battle. Communist forces transported ammunition, food and medical supplies largely by foot, bicycle and porters moving along jungle trails that were difficult to detect from the air. Their relatively short supply lines allowed them to maintain pressure for several days despite repeated American and South Vietnamese airstrikes. The defenders relied heavily on helicopters to move reinforcements, ammunition, food and medical evacuation. Artillery support came from nearby fire bases, while aircraft delivered bombs, rockets and machine gun fire against suspected enemy positions. However, dense vegetation, uncertain intelligence and the close proximity of opposing forces limited the effectiveness of supporting fire. Communications between different South Vietnamese units also proved difficult during the rapidly changing battle. The fighting continued until approximately the 13th of June. By then, Communist forces had achieved their principal objectives. They had captured and destroyed much of Dong Xoai, inflicted severe losses on several South Vietnamese units and successfully defeated multiple relief attempts. Rather than attempting to hold the town permanently against overwhelming air power and future reinforcements, the Communist formations withdrew in good order into surrounding jungle areas, following their operational plan. Casualty figures differ among historical sources. Most historians estimate that South Vietnamese forces suffered roughly 400 to 600 killed, with several hundred additional wounded or missing. American losses included a small number of Special Forces personnel killed, along with other advisors wounded during the fighting. Communist casualties are more difficult to determine because many dead and wounded were removed from the battlefield during withdrawal. Most modern estimates place Communist losses at several hundred killed, although official claims from both sides varied considerably and were often influenced by wartime reporting. The battle illustrated several important tactical lessons. The Communist forces demonstrated effective planning, surprise, coordination between infantry and heavy weapons, disciplined use of reserves, and successful employment of ambush tactics against predictable relief operations. Their commanders showed an increasing ability to fight battalion and regimental-sized engagements instead of relying solely on guerrilla warfare. For the South Vietnamese and American forces, the battle highlighted the dangers of rushing reinforcements into areas where the enemy had prepared defensive positions. It also demonstrated that air power and artillery, while powerful, could not always compensate for limited intelligence or for unfavorable terrain. The engagement reinforced the need for improved reconnaissance, communications and coordination between the ground and air units. The Battle of Dong Xoai had strategic consequences beyond its immediate military outcome. Coming at a time when the United States was debating a larger military commitment, it reinforced concerns that the Army of the Republic of Vietnam could not consistently defeat major Communist formations without substantial American combat support. Along with other battles fought in 1965, Dong Xoai influenced the decision to deploy increasing numbers of US ground troops and expand American combat operations across South Vietnam. Today, military historians regard the Battle of Dong Xoai as one of the defining engagements of the early Vietnam War. Although smaller than later battles such as La Drang, it demonstrated the growing capability of Communist main force units. It exposed weaknesses in South Vietnamese relief operations and foreshadowed the increasingly conventional and large-scale battles that would characterize the conflict over the following years.